For within the Palace Royal, its monarch, Prince Namor I, lies ill.
Who are you?
But my enemies call me Namor.
That Namor, I would say he obviously was given that name also by someone in the film.
El niño sin amor. Por eso le dicen Namor.
¿En serio?
El niño que creció sin amor.
Translation, Namor now means a boy who grew up without love.
Prince Namor I.
For Namor, the submariner is back.
Prince Namor I.
But my enemies call me Namor.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
What else could I add? Literally, what else could I add? What could I add? Yeah, this is about Namor, not Namor, not this rebranding racist nonsense. This is crazy. So I am going to share with you. This is the Saga of the Submariner, Roy Thomas, 1988, issue number 1. Who is Namor? Let me just cut to it. Let's just do it. Let me just show you. So in the back of this issue, the very last section, all the way to the back of this issue, it's the digital copy. Okay, it has this page, and what I want to do is scroll down some of this stuff, and this is Roy writing this. Okay. Lucky for comics, and lucky for all of us who read them, one of those whom Samuel Taylor Coleridge's doomed sailor later stopped was Bill Everett, whose Submariner was destined to become a seminal influence on the early days of comic books in general, and the future of Marvel Comics in particular. This 12-issue Saga of the Submariner is a celebration of writer/artist Bill Everett and his creation, Prince Namor, featuring the spectacular art of Rich Buckler and Bob McLeod. Its first 6 issues will feature, quote, the first great days of Namor, his debut through 1953 to the 1955 incarnation, which marked his last appearance in the so-called golden age of comics. And the second half of Saga picks him up with his triumphant return as a hero/villain in the Fantastic Four, number 4, in 1962, right up to his present exploits as one of the Avengers. And is one who cared a lot for Bill, from the day I met him in 1965 till his death in 1973. I hope I'll be forgiven for using the space kindly provided by editors Terry Cavanaugh and Mike Rockwitz over the next few issues to toss in a few personal recollections along the way, saving most of the biological stuff about Bill for next time. So what you're getting here is Roy explaining that for Namor, he's been tasked with doing Saga of the Submariner, a 12-part miniseries where half of it will be, into the Golden Age and then the New Era. And notice his tenor and his tone. It's about paying tribute to the creators that came before him, about bringing everyone up to speed, about honor and respect. And then we fast forward to 2022 and we get Namor, the Aztec. If you wonder why I put Gary in that clip on purpose, because I felt like exactly how he felt. Like there is no Namor. Like I don't even know what we're talking about. Let's read on, shall we? Let's try to understand. Okay, so why a dozen special issues devoted to the quote Saga of Submariner, a hero who hasn't even had his own monthly title since 1974? Well, because Prince Namor, the Submariner, was arguably the very first hero of what's now called the Marvel Universe. For Namor, along with the Human Torch and the African jungle hero Khazar, made his debut in a 16-page story in Marvel Comics #1, cover dated around the same times the Germans hit Poland. The publisher was Martin Goodman, who had already put out Marvel Tales Pulp magazine a year or two earlier in Marvel #1. It became Marvel Mystery Comics with issue #2. It was the first comic produced by Timely Comics, the forerunner to today's Marvel. And yet it seems that probably the Bill Everett Submariner is even a bit older than Marvel #1, although The precise facts are still in dispute because you see, sometime in 1939, there appeared as a giveaway a short-lived black and white, unfortunately undated magazine called Motion Picture Funnies Weekly, copies of which only came to light in recent years. So what Roy is chronicling is that there's actually like this little black and white photo, this very sort of like first appearance of Namor that even predates what we thought we knew as the first appearance. So that has actually come into play. Now, of course, we know much more because this obviously was written back in 1988, and the actual first appearance, as he says, it's a comic called Motion Pictures Funnies. So I'm going to show you this. Now, I don't have a copy. I had a hard time finding a decent copy, so I'm just going to show you my phone. So I have it pulled up. It's literally an obscure comic that looks like that. That's literally what he's talking about. This little black and white photos in there. Okay, this is where it comes from. The first interior appearance of Namor, the Submariner. There you go. Okay. All right. This is what Roy is explaining to you. He's got your art. There's your first looks. Because reality is you may go your whole life and never see one of these things. This was actually published in, as he says, 1939 by Bill Everett. So, fast forward, we have had a lot of changes and a lot of history. And Roy is really trying to pay homage and respect to this character that really is the forerunner to Marvel. Like, this is crazy. This stuff comes up all the time. So he goes on to explain some of the stuff about how Namor came into play. And I just want to plant the seeds with you to understand why some of this is important, especially to us comic book fans, when you understand the lore and the history behind things. So when you understand why we care, maybe then you'll understand why we care, if that makes sense. Okay, so let me try my best, right? Okay, again, this is literally a page in the back of Saga of the Submariner. I have this digitally, but you can get a copy. Like I said, this is a very inexpensive, in the grand scheme of things. So this is about how Namor is being created, how Bill Everett came about it. And he says, first, Namor's face was modeled at least partly on Bill's own, down to its angular features, though Bill's version was never as triangle-headed as Namor became when drawn by others during Bill's army stint during World War II. And in the early days, Namor, like Bill himself, even sported red hair. Second, that in the anti-heroic, almost villainous mode, which was part and parcel of Namor from the start, and which made him unique among comic heroes of the time, he was the ancestor and doubtless an influence on Stan Lee's more human approach to superhero scripting, which began with Fantastic Four #1 in 1961, which made it all the more fitting that when Stan and artist Jack Kirby resuscitated him in Fantastic Four #4, it was Bill Everett's Namor that they brought back, not a semi-new hero such as Johnny Storm, the version of Human Torch. The Submariner didn't need revamping. Let me read that again. The Submariner didn't need revamping. The Submariner didn't need revamping. He only needed to be seen to be appreciated. The appreciated he was by a new generation, most of whom hadn't been around when Namor had last appeared in 1955. So, think about this. This creation is going to be sort of like reintroduced in Marvel in the 1960s by Stan Lee, obviously Jack Kirby. They make a major change with Human Torch, right? So Human Torch is a completely different character. We get Johnny Storm. But they don't make those changes. He looks like Bill. And he says repeatedly, they don't need to be changed. The character is fantastic like it is. The whole point is this dichotomy of hero and villain all embodied in the same character and the struggle that's going on. And yet now, again, play the clip again. My enemies call me Namor. I hope not. I hope not. Okay. Okay, let me go to the last section. It's right over here. All right, let me get up here. Okay, in 1949, Timely's Big Three, Captain America, The Human Torch, and Namor, went into limbo along with most superheroes of the day. Crime and horror comics were the new mainstay. In 1953, reasons no one's quite figured out, Martin Goodwin, his editor, one Stan Lee, decided to revive the Big Three in the 24th issue of a comic oddly titled Young Men. The heroes ran 5 issues of Young Men, two of the adventures with Cap and the Human Torch, and 10 issues of Submariner, 33 to 42. This is back in 1954 to 1955. He goes on. Let's see. There's also a reason for some of this because Lloyd Bridges' still rerunning Sea Hunt was a big deal on TV. A production company bought an option on Namor for the small screen with the intention that a fairly popular movie actor named Richard Egan would play one of the comics in so-called Deep Sea Avenger. Considering Namor's most recent Marvel stint, looks like it was a pretty prescient epithet. But as for myself, Roy Thomas, I love those Submariner comic books, which today's terminology harder edged than most comics, because I had no idea who the artist was. For truth to tell, I could never quite read the distinct signature of his. The closest I will ever came before a fellow student teacher filled me around 1961 was Bill Ennereth. He didn't even quite know his name. And of course, Bill got a kick out of the fact when they met. He didn't even quite know it was Bill Everett because of the way the handwriting and stuff was done. So anyway, it kind of goes through a few more details here, but gives you an idea of the original story, the original intent that he's kind of was going for. I want to get to issue number, I think it's issue number 2, and show you a little bit about what's in the back. I think it's in the back of 2. If it's not in the back of 2, it's in the back of 3. Because I was really struck by Roy's, yeah, it's in here. So this is part 2. It talks about Bill, Wild Bill Everett, and Smilin' Stan Lee, dubbed him back in the 1960s. He kind of goes through his life a little bit, and I'm just really struck by the fact that the life experiences this person had and brought to the page. Like this is about it's just really fascinating how much of their life. He was in the war and he works in the, he struggled, and different things like that come into play. Talks about art school, talks about all these different things. Let me see here. There's a couple of things he wanted to okay, so this is about him talking about the character. And he says, we couldn't help but notice the sincere look in Bill's eyes when he spoke. Whew, that was a corker, Bill. Where does a submariner come in? He smiled. Well, who knows? To me, it was he who helped me that night. So it's kind of like one of these life stories of being in the water and those kinds of things. And then it says, for the duration of that trip, I constantly reminded of Coleridge's Ancient Mariner, the poem that tells about the supernatural powers of the sea. And I suppose that some bearing on my title, Submariner, and I owe my life to that. Right. So it's just, he talks about these influences. And then he says, and Roy says, when I interviewed Bill in 1972, it's a fanzine called Alter Ego. Here's what he said. We can be honest about it now. I think I wrote the story myself as we needed a filler. It was just a little incident that happened when I was at sea, and it was dramatic, and it did scare me. But that's not where I actually got the idea of Submariner. It seemed like a good idea to say it was. We forgive you, Bill. All right, now, what was the story, right? Okay. He's talking about being off the East Coast and got a job at a seagoing from Maine to Florida, right? They're doing a run, and one of the Florida hurricanes is about to hit, okay? And it shook like an old tub, like it was a toy. I happened to be at the wheel, and the full force of the storm spun it like a top. One of the bigger men took over for a minute, but there was another job to be done. The wireless antenna had been blown down, and it meant a climb up the slippery rope stays at the top of the mast, and I was elected. And I climbed in my oilskins and started up. The wind cut my face and hands, and I did all I could to hold on. The rigging was wet and slippery. My job was to carry out that loose wire all the way and tie it back to the mast. And I finally reached the top and stood upright on the cross trees. The wind slashed my oils and I cracked like thunder. And suddenly, I had done my job. I felt myself being swept off my perch into thin air. I grabbed and luckily caught the end of the rope. I swung there half dazed for a moment, only to realize my hand was slowly slipping off the wet hemp. Before I could see the wash deck glaring up at me, the cold wind had numbed my spirit and the cold feeling came over me. I felt I was not alone. Something seemed to take hold of me and lift me bodily back to the cross trees. I lay there for a minute. When I finally got a grip on myself, I looked up to see, or what helped me, there's no one there. So imagine the fact that we're moving through time and you have this creator who's tapping into the emotional spirit of that. And it was a story that he thought would be, good for people to connect with his character. And he says, it didn't make me think of Submariner exactly, but there was this essence of the emotional ride, the helplessness, and yet the strength and a spirit of someone who would swoop in and help the innocent and then move away. Talk about a theme that comes up in the comics several times, right? A World War II vet, a person that lived a tough life, those kinds of things. And what do we get? We now get this version of NAMOR. Who is Submariner? Well, I gave you a little bit of what Roy Thomas has to say. I don't know. Tell me what you guys think. Does it make you want to read it more or less? Maybe there's something else that I don't know about that you would recommend me checking out. I found that because I was rereading Saga. It's on my must read because it's a great way to catch up on, like I said, 40 years of this character's legacy in 12 issues. So anyway, I'm Pops. Tell me what you guys think. I appreciate it so much. Thanks for being with me.